This is the first in a new series entitled Old Liners. Most of the film is sourced from old 8mm and 16mm film purchased through eBay. The quality of the film varies accordingly, and some rather poor film has been included because the ship in question is of particular interest. However, there is also some exceptionally good film taken in the 1930s, whilst most of the rest of the film is in colour. The pictures in the introduction I took myself while serving in Orontes in 1962. She's seen leaving Fremantle on her last voyage home. The aircraft carrier is HMS Bullock. The first ship we see is the Adelaide Star, which is seen here in the Royal Docks in London. She was built by Brown on Clydebank for Blue Star. She's a refrigerated cargo liner. Also built by Brown on Clydebank, this time for P&O, is the Arcadia. She could carry 675 first-class passengers, 735 tourist-class passengers, and had a crew of 710. She's seen here at sea. These last pictures of Arcadia were taken in Southampton. You'll see an Aleksandr tug in the foreground. The troop ship is possibly the Empire Fowey, or maybe the Empire Orwell. We now come to another Arcadia, this time spelt with a K. Arcadia was built for Furnace Withy by Vickers Armstrong as the monarch of Bermuda. In 1949 she became the New Australia, and in 1958 Arcadia, and as such she took 150 first-class passengers and 1,150 tourist class. Our pictures show her entering Funchal in Madeira. The last pictures show her turned around and ready to leave. The Augustus was built by Ansaldo Sestri Ponente for Navigazione Generale Italiana in Genoa. These remarkable black and white pictures were taken in the 1930s in the port of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. A rather poor picture of the Aurania, built by Swan Hunter and Wignham for Cunard line. She's seen here with an Alexander tug in Southampton. The Alexander Mozhaisky was originally Patria, built in 1919 by the Dutch. She was sold to the Soviets, who removed one funnel in 1928 and was used for their Pacific service. Built by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, the Royal Mail Lines. The Asturias was completed in 1926. We're going to join her on a voyage to the South Atlantic, and you see here passengers enjoying the swimming pools, and more about that later. We can now have a look around the ship. See here the top deck and top of one of the tunnels. And we now see the promenade deck, a very broad deck, part of which was used for quoit tennis. We can watch now as cargo is loaded and unloaded in the port of Rio de Janeiro. Whilst in port, some of the crew members are painting ship, and you'll see passengers going ashore for an excursion, which they do in old cars, although they weren't quite so old at that time. And another shot of the broad promenade deck, where passengers are relaxing in deck chairs. I mentioned earlier that I would say more about the swimming pools. These were constructed, not built as part of the ship, but they seem to be two pools, one reserved for men and one for ladies. No doubt very appropriate for the times. Here is one of the lifeboats. It's quite a long stretch between Rio de Janeiro and Funchal in Madeira, which will be our next port, and passengers are relaxing one way or another on deck. Asturias arrived in Funchal and anchored in the bay. I make no apology for showing these street scenes in Funchal. You go to Funchal now, you'll find that all the cobbles have gone. There are no more bullock carts, but the flower ladies are still there in their distinctive red dresses, selling their flowers outside the market. A barrel of Blandy's best Madeira wine being taken down to the edge of the harbour, no doubt to be taken by boat and loaded on to Asturias as she lies in the bay. The bullock cart drivers wait on the wharf for passengers coming off Asturias, in the hope that they'll hire them. And we see here Alacantra, Asturias' sister, leaving Madeira on her way to South America. The passengers are now returning to the ship. Having had a day in Funchal, they're returning by boat. And here 2 men row a boat while a diver prepares to dive for coins from passengers on the ship, and other bumboats are selling their wares, which are generally linen goods, to those waiting on the promenade deck above. And so we'll leave Asturias as some passengers join a steam launch from the ship to take them to the shore. Originally a French liner called the Tahitian of Messageries Maritimes, built by Arsenal de Brest. She was sold in 1972 and renamed Atlante. As originally built, she took 74 first-class passengers, 84 tourist class and 208 third class. As Atlante, she was used for Mediterranean cruises. We now see the ferry Atlantis tied up in a Mediterranean port, and then you see the Camiros, another ferry, leaving the port. Some lovely black and white footage of the Bremen, which was built by Deutsche Mag AG Wesso for North German Lloyd. She took 800 first-class passengers, 500 second-class passengers, and 300 tourist-class passengers. She also had 600 third-class passengers. She had a crew of 990. She was set on fire by a disgruntled cabin boy. A very quick glimpse of the Calabria of Tirrenia lines, which took 560 passengers between Naples or Palermo and Tunis. We're going to spend some time now on board Caledonia, which was built by Fairfield of Glasgow for the Anchor Line, for the Liverpool to Bombay run. She's leaving Bombay. The gangway is about to be taken down. The film is old and therefore a little misty. However, it's good film, and I've kept it in. Between Bombay and the next port, which will be Aden, the passengers relax and play deck games. Leaving Aden, there's more leisure time to play games and sunbathe. This young man seems to have got a very red back. Caledonia reaches Port Ciudad, where she'll be loading bales of cotton. There's time in between selling one's merchandise for daily prayers, and some of the passengers take the opportunity to go ashore as the workers come up the gangway. Caledonia is now in the Suez Canal. She's passing an Ellerman ship and others as they go through the cut on the way south, and she's going north towards Port Said. It takes best part of a day to get through the Suez Canal, quite often with a stop in the Bitter Lakes in between. But there's always plenty to see, whether it be a train passing, a dhow, or a few camels. And here we reach Port Said. The bumboat traders are selling poufs made of leather and camel leather suitcases and other trinkets. The pontoon is moved out towards the ship so the passengers can go ashore. On board, the gully gully man entertains the children. Now you see it, now you don't. And our last shots show Caledonia tied up in her home port. Built by Swan Hunter and Wignham Richardson of Newcastle for SGTM Marseille, Campana took 106 first-class passengers, 152 second-class passengers, 230 third-class passengers and 820 steerage passengers. We see her here in Rio de Janeiro. Caronia was built by Brown on Clydebank for Cunard. As built, she took 581 first class, 351 cabin, and she had a crew of 600. Although she was used on the Southampton to New York run, her purpose was mainly cruising. She was sold. In 1968 she was renamed Columbia, and then in the same year Caribia. And now a quick shot of the Citta di Nuoro. She was built for Aurania by Naval Mechanica. Ellerman's city of Exeter was built by Vickers Armstrong, Newcastle. She took 107 first-class passengers. Another small ship, the Ciudad de Compostela, built by Campana de Trans-Mediterranean, the Society Española de Construcción Navale. The troop ship Devonshire, built by Fairfield Glasgow for Bibby Line. She took 104 first-class passengers, 90 second-class passengers, and 1,150 troops. When refitted in 1954, she took 130 first-class and 96 second, and 99 third-class passengers, and just 824 troops. Another troop ship, Empire Hallidale. She was built by Vulcan Hamburg as the Antonio Delfino. In 1932 she became the Sierra Nevada, and in 1934 the Antonio Delfino. In 1946 she became the Empire Hallidale, and she took 200 cabin class passengers, 843 troops. She was operated by the Anchor Line. She's seen here leaving Hong Kong. The ship you will see on the right is the Estonia, which was built for the Baltic Shipping Company and was one of 12 sisters. You've seen here berthed in front of the Oronsay. The Ex-Cambion II was originally built as the U.S. transport ship Texas Clipper in 1944. She was renamed in 1965 Ex-Cambion II. Here she was, a converted C3 class ship, the Rio de la Plata, built by Sand Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in 1941. She was taken over by the U.S. government and converted to a carrier, the HMS Charger. She was sold in 1949 to Sitmar, renamed Fairseas, and carried 1,460 passengers. Built by Swan Hunter for Shore Saville, the Gothic is seen here with Britannia off Suva. They were there for the Fijian independence celebration. Another shot shows her in the Royal Docks in London. The Gunung Dejati was built by Blohm & Voss as Pretoria for German East Africa Line. She was later the Empire Orwell before being sold to the Indonesians. A quick shot of the Isle of Man packet of 1983. Jupiter was built by Ateliers et Chantiers for Zim Israel and chartered by Thomson. This ship sank in 1988 after a collision outside Piraeus. We see her on a Mediterranean cruise for Thomson. Built by Earls and Company Hull as the Melrose Abbey, the Critty took 182 first-class passengers, 136 tourist-class passengers, and 32 in dormitories. Latvia was a Mikhail Galinia class ship built by VEP Matthias Thiessen for the USSR. The Leda was a North Sea ferry operated by Bergen Line. In 1981 she was converted for cruising and renamed Albatross, which is as you see her here. He later served as an Italian prison ship, and later still was boarded by Greenpeace on her way to the breakers. We can spend some time now watching the Mauritania too. She was built by Camel Laird for Cunard. She originally took 440 cabin class passengers, 450 tourists, 470 third class passengers, and had 780 crew. She was on the Liverpool to New York line, and then in 1939 she switched to Southampton to New York line. She served as a troop ship, and when she came back in 1949 she was converted again, this time taking 475 first class passengers, 390 in cabin class and 300 tourists. We see her here on a transatlantic voyage. By 1962 her role had changed to mainly cruising, and she was painted green. She's seen here in her green colours in Funchal. Mermoz, originally built as the motor ship Jean Mermoz, she was rebuilt in 1970 as the Mermoz of 13,804 tons. She had a long life. The motor ship Monte was built by Blom and Voss for the Hamburg South America line. She served as a hospital ship during the war, but was bombed and sank in Kiel in 1945. We're going to join Monte Aquiliola. She was built by Society Española de CN for the Anzar line. In 1949 she became the Guadeloupe, and in 1974 the Climax Garnet. The passengers for this voyage joined her in the Pool of London. They were soon experiencing some pretty rough weather, but they seemed to enjoy it nonetheless. Having had a look around the top decks of the ship, we now see some of the crew painting and working on the masts. There's never a slack moment for the crew of a ship when at sea. But the passengers can relax and enjoy some deck games, albeit a little limited by the size of the ship. And the captain has the chance to have a chat to some of the passengers, while others take the opportunity to have a swim as the weather gets more pleasant. We see the ship here tied up in the Canaries. I'm not quite sure of which port, but probably Tenerife. And then it's back to sea again and back towards the UK, and as we get closer the weather gets a little rougher. The ship picks up her river pilot at Gravesend and makes her way up the Thames towards Tower Bridge. As she nears the Pool of London, she's pulled in by a Watkins tug and a Gamecock tug. Tower Bridge is surrounded with mist. The drawbridge opens and the ship passes through. We get a good view of the Tower of London as we move towards our berth. Navassa was built by Barclay Curle for British India Line. She was a troop ship, and she carried 220 first-class passengers, 100 second-class passengers, 180 third-class passengers, and 1,000 troops. She was rebuilt in 1964 for school cruising. In that role she had 307 passengers in cabins and 703 children in dormitories. She's seen here as a school ship. The Dutch ship Aurania is seen here. She was built for the Amsterdam-Bavaria run. In 1941 she was a hospital ship, and she was back in service in 1946. In 1964 she became the Angelina Lauro. Built by Vickers Armstrong for the Orient Steam Navigation Company, the Orange was a twin sister to Arcadia. She carried 668 first-class passengers and 833 tourists and had 622 crew. Seen here in her Orient Line colours in the Thames. Built by Penhoe and St Nazaire for sea sub-Atlantique Bordeaux, Pasteur was a ship you could not miss because of her large funnel. In 1957 she became the Bremen, and in 1972 Regina Magna. She's seen here in Aden in her original colours. Built originally by Swan Hunter Wigram as a ferry on the Tilbury to Gothenburg service, Patricia became a cruise liner, Adriatic, in 1972. Built by Brown on Clydebank for Cunard, the Queen Elizabeth started life in 1940 as a troop ship. She was returned to service in 1946 and put on the Southampton to New York run. She was sold to the United States in 1968 and then sold again in 1970 and renamed Seawise University. She sunk in 1974 in Hong Kong harbour, having been burnt out whilst refitting. Like her sister Queen Mary, she carried a lot of very important people and film stars back and forth from the UK to the United States. But her days were numbered once the jet planes came into service. Another ship for Cunard built by Brown on Clydebank. The Queen Mary was completed in 1934. We can watch some black and white film of her early days on transatlantic voyages from Southampton to New York. A rather misty look at the skyline in New York with the Empire State Building, at that time the tallest building in the world. It was really a very romantic time to travel across the Atlantic, and Queen Mary vied with the Normandy for a few years in the early days for the Blue Ribbon before making it her own. Queen Mary, like many ocean liners, became a troop ship. 1939-40, she carried thousands of troops crammed into her with a hotbed system in full operation. Here we see her approaching the United Kingdom, and you'll see an airship above. Here she is in Southampton with an Aleksandr tug pulling her in towards the shore and a seaplane flying overhead. After the war, she resumed her Atlantic service with the Queen Elizabeth in tandem. Kept this up well into the 1960s before air travel took away most of the most important passengers, the profitable side of the business. Here we see Queen Mary leaving New York. She's waved away. A deck buffet. Passengers going ashore in a ship's launch. The Statue of Liberty, and this time arrival in New York. Some shots taken of passengers on the upper decks. The joy is that Queen Mary has been preserved and can be seen in Long Beach in California. As a young man, I used to see both the Queens in Southampton on my way up by train from Poole to London. I remember also as a young man when serving in the Empire Orwell. We were berthed opposite the ocean terminal where Queen Mary was berthed, and I looked from our 15,000-ton ship up at the Queen Mary, and she seemed huge. Well, maybe not so huge in today's standards, but far more elegant. The Reggio was a train ferry which went from Reggio to Messina and took 13 rail coaches. I have been unable to establish her tonnage. Built by Seattle Tacoma SB. She was initially the US carrier Glacier and then HMS Atheling. Built in 1935 as Patria by Deutsche Werft, in 1945 she became Empire Welland, and in 1946 Rocha. She was on the Liverpool to New York run and then Odessa to New York. As built, she took 185 first-class passengers, 164 tourist-class passengers. The Santa Maria de la Candelabra was a passenger cargo ship built by the Union Naval Valencia for Campana Trans-Mediterranea. Built by De Scheldo, Willesenden, for Rotterdam Lloyd, for the Rotterdam Batavia service. She's seen here in the Atlantic. Built by Camel Laird and Company, Birkenhead, for the Union Castle line, the Transvaal Castle served on the Southampton to Durban run. She was transferred to South African Marine Corps in 1966 and renamed S.A. Vaal, which we will see later. She was the last passenger ship built for the Union Castle line. Originally, she carried 728 passengers in one class and had 426 crew. We have the chance now to have a look at some of the interiors of the ship. A rather luxurious cabin. The cinema. Built by Barclay Curle and Company for British India, the Uganda was converted to school cruising in 1967. She would later serve as a hospital ship in the Falklands War before coming back for a short time as a school ship. Uganda was a very popular ship, particularly amongst the students. As originally built, she carried 167 first-class passengers and 133 tourists. We now look at the ship at the left-hand side, and this is the Aurania. It was built by Burmaster and Wain, Copenhagen, and was originally called Bessarabia. She transferred to the Russians in 1948. We've already seen the Transvaal Castle, and now we see the S.A. Vaal, which of course was the same ship. She became the Vaal in 1966 when she was transferred from Union Castle to S.A. Marine Corps. As the Vaal, she carried 728 one-class passengers. and she was withdrawn from service in 1977. Here we get a look at Cape Town. Table Mountain is covered in mist. It was and is, of course, vital to exercise the crew in lifeboat drill. And here we see one of the lifeboats filled to capacity. A very quick shot of the Vera cruise, built by Cockerell, Hoboken, for Sea Colonial Lisbon. It took 150 first-class passengers, 252nd and 233rd, and 644 in dormitories. The Virginia de Chirica was on the service between Genoa, Barcelona, Valencia, Alicante, Cadiz and Tenerife. Lloyd Triestino's Victoria was built by Ciudad del Adriatico, San Marco. She was completed in 1953 and was used on the Genoa to Hong Kong service. In 1974 she was sold to Adriatica, San Venice. Very quick shot of Union Castle's Windsor Castle, tied up in Southampton. She was built by Camel Laird and Company. Built as the Cranston Victory, the Zoider cruise was sold to the Dutch government in 1947, one of 3 ships they used for migrants and repatriations. Beside operating in the Atlantic, they've also been used on the Australian route, the Far East, and on the South African route. Well, that brings us to an end of this, the first part of the Old Liners. We hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to be able to bring you another one of these next year.